The signal had been running for 311 years before I heard it. I know that because the first thing archivist Sorvith Khan told me, when the transport settled into the derelict's docking cradle and the airlock pressurized with a sound like something exhaling after a very long time, was the exact figure. 311 years, 14 days, 6 hours. He delivered it the way a physician delivers a terminal prognosis, factually, without inflection, watching my face to see how I'd take it. Fine. I'd heard worse numbers in worse places. My name is Marin Solis. I was 53 years old when they brought me aboard the Vatharan, and I had spent 22 of those years inside a prefabricated listening station on the Greenland shelf, doing nothing but cataloging deep space carrier waves, not translating them, not decoding them, cataloging them, logging the frequency, the pulse interval, the harmonic envelope, the drift. Thousands of signals from thousands of sources, most of them natural, most of them meaningless, all of them entered into a database that nobody read. That was the job. I was good at it. When the Keth Consortium's recovery team had found the Vatharan drifting in the outer belt 7 months ago, they had found the orb the same day. It sat in what they called the resonance cradle, a sealed alcove in the ship's lower signal room, behind a door that had not opened since the ship went dark. The orb itself was roughly the size of a standard atmosphere canister, perfectly smooth, made of something that looked like, but registered no mineral signature that their instruments recognized. And it was transmitting, signal, repeating. Unbroken for 311 years. They had brought in 6 specialists before me, a Velthian signal theorist, 2 Kethian harmonic engineers, a Sorvith xenolinguistics team of 3. None of them had been able to do anything with it. The orb would not respond to broadcast. It would not respond to physical contact. The door to the resonance cradle had opened exactly once. The first time a recovery technician had stood in front of it, Khan described as an anomaly they had not been able to replicate. Since then it had stayed open, the alcove accessible, the orb sitting in its cradle in full view, transmitting its signal to a room full of people who could not hear what it was saying. Sorvith Khan told me all of this in the corridor outside the signal room. He was tall, the way all Velthians are tall, with the translucent cranial membrane that goes pale gray when they are uncertain. His was pale gray the entire walk down. "We brought you because your database appeared in the harmonic literature," he said. "One of our engineers found a citation, paper published 14 years ago by the Reykjavik Array Collective, a classification methodology for low-frequency, deep space carrier structures. Your name was on it." "Third author," I said. "You were the one who built the classification tree." I didn't argue with that. The signal room was larger than I expected, and darker, lit by the pale blue emergency strips running along the floor and the thin daylight that fell through a long horizontal breach in the hull plating above, a stress fracture, partially sealed with repair foam, letting in a narrow bar of the system's sun. The light fell directly across the resonance cradle. The orb sat in it like something placed there deliberately. I stood at the threshold for a moment and listened. The signal was audible, as a sound in this room. The consortium had rigged a speaker array to convert the transmission into audio so their specialists could work with it. It came as a low, steady pulse. 1 beat, pause, 3 beats, pause, 1 beat. Then a longer pause, and the harmonic envelope shifted, a slow descending arc across 4 tones before the pulse began again. 1 pause, 3 pause, 1. I stood there for perhaps 40 seconds. Then I said to Sorvith Khan, "Do you have a tone board? Manual input, variable frequency. Doesn't need to be sophisticated." He looked at one of his technicians. The technician produced a handheld field unit from a case on the equipment table. I took it, checked the frequency range, more than adequate, and walked into the room. I want to be precise about what I did next, because I have been asked to explain it many times, and I have never fully satisfied anyone with the explanation. What I did was not complicated. It was not clever. It was the thing I had done 10,000 times in the station on the Greenland shelf, which was this. I listened to the structure of the signal until I understood what kind of signal it was, and then I responded in the same format. Pulse pattern. 131 was not a code. It was a handshake. In 22 years of deep space signal work, I had cataloged 37 distinct handshake structures, And this one matched a class we had designated Type G, a carrier wave query that expected a mirroring response before it would proceed to content. The signal was not transmitting information. It was asking if anyone was home. It had been asking for 311 years because nobody had answered in the correct format. I keyed the tone board to the orb's base frequency. I set the pulse interval to match, and I sent back 1 pause 3 pause 1. The signal stopped. In the sudden quiet, I heard Sorvith Khan take one sharp breath behind me. I heard a technician's chair scrape back. I kept my eyes on the orb. For 4 seconds nothing happened, then the surface of the orb changed. It did not crack. It did not shatter or split or hinge open. The surface simply became something other than what it had been. The obsidian dark shell thinning to translucence in a widening ring from the center, the way ice thaws from its edges inward. Except this was not ice and it was not thawing. Beneath the surface something was lit. A warm amber glow, deep and steady, coal that has been banked for a long time and is only now being given air. The amber deepened. The translucence spread. Then the glow shifted, cycled through amber to pale gold to something between white and blue, settling finally on a color I do not have a precise name for, which I can only describe as the color of first light on still water. It was very beautiful. I noticed that I was not frightened by it, which surprised me less than it probably should have. The orb lifted from its cradle, not quickly, not dramatically. It rose the way a buoy rises on a slow swell, an inch, then two. Then it was hovering at chest height, the cradle empty beneath it. The glow was steady. The pulse was gone. Then it spoke. The voice came from the orb itself, from some speaker or resonance mechanism inside it that the consortium's engineers had not detected, which I mention only because they had spent considerable time convincing themselves there was no speaker. It was a low voice, unhurried, in a language I did not recognize, which I expected. It spoke for perhaps 6 seconds. A complete sentence, or what felt like a complete sentence. Then it spoke again, in Keth standard, for my benefit or theirs. You were called, Keeper. 4 words, that was all. I looked at the orb for a moment. Then I looked back at Sorvith Khan. His cranial membrane was no longer pale gray. It was a color I had not seen a Velthian membrane go before, a deep, still violet. I learned later that violet means something close to what a human would call reverence. What does it mean? One of the technicians said from somewhere behind him, "Bye, Keeper?" "I don't know yet," I said. That was true at the time. What happened after is harder to describe precisely, because the orb did not explain itself, and we did not ask it to, not immediately. It descended back to its cradle as slowly as it had risen. The glow remained. That first light on water color, pulsing now in a new pattern, one I did not recognize and did not try to catalog yet. There would be time for that. But in the 40 minutes that followed, while Sorvith Khan's technicians ran every sensor array they had at the orb, and Khan himself stood very still in the corner with his membrane going, violet to blue to violet again. 3 other things happened aboard the Vatherin. The first was small. The lighting in the signal room changed. The emergency strips along the floor went dark, and the overheads came on. The ship's own lighting, after 311 years offline, warming from deep amber to a clean, even white. The breach in the hull plating was still there, but the repair foam around it shifted and sealed itself more thoroughly than the consortium's patch teams had managed in 7 months of trying. The second was less small. A door in the aft corridor that had been sealed since the recovery team's arrival opened. Behind it was a room none of the deck plans showed. A long, low chamber with the same cradle design as the signal room, but larger, and holding not 1 orb but 11. All of them dark, all of them waiting. The third, the ship's navigation core, which the consortium's engineers had logged as non-recoverable, powered on. Not fully, it drew minimal current, the way something draws minimal current when it is in standby mode rather than when it is dead, as if it had simply been waiting for something to happen before it decided whether to wake up. I wrote my report on the transport home, 10 pages, standard field assessment format, technical findings only, the signal classification, the handshake structure, Type G methodology, the orb's response characteristics, the secondary activations. I filed it through the consortium's intake system the same day I landed. I have been told since that it has been read by a significant number of people. most of them considerably more important than me. I don't know precisely what a keeper is. I have some ideas. The 11 dark orbs in the aft chamber suggest that the word is not an honorific but an assignment. That something aboard Vatherin had a function once that required someone to maintain it. Someone who could listen. Someone who could hear a question that had been repeating for 3 centuries and understand what kind of answer it needed. Days when I think about the 6 specialists who came before me, and I do not feel superior to them. They were better theorists than I was, almost certainly better linguists, more credentialed. What they were not was 22 years deep in a listening station, cataloging low-frequency carrier structures in a database that nobody read, learning the grammar of a silence so thoroughly that they could hear what it was asking for. I think about the orb, too, about the fact that it had been transmitting for 311 years, that it had waited, that it had kept the question running. 1 beat, across 3 centuries of no answer, not degrading, not simplifying, not stopping, just waiting for someone to come along who had learned, in a cold station on a Greenland shelf, how to listen to the dark, long enough to hear what it was saying. There is something very human about that kind of patience. Or perhaps there isn't. Perhaps it only looks that way to me, because I am the one who answered. Either way, the navigation corps is still in standby. I have been asked to return to the Vatherin next month to begin cataloging the remaining 11 orbs. I said yes, that is the job. I am good at it.